Hey, what's up guys, Bionic here and welcome to another build guide video for the Rogue. This is going to be an update of the poison blades that we just recently showcased. Instead of focusing on speed running nightmare dungeons, now we're going to be focusing on trying to push for higher difficulty. So the concept is very similar to the prior one, but we have sacrificed a decent amount of DPS to instead focus on survivability, while also adding a lot of control in the form of freeze, which in return gives us even more survivability, but also a little bit more DPS. So in a sense, we are probably breaking even in terms of damage of where we were prior to making these modifications. So let me first start by explaining how the build works. We are still using Death Trap along with Poison Trap to pull and knock down the enemies. And then we're also using Twisted Blades with the Poison Imbuement to deal our damage. But you will notice that we have now changed our boots to have the chill effect, and we've added a few different other chill amplifiers on our gear and our Paragon board to freeze our targets as quickly as possible. Another change that was made was to swap out our specialization from preparation to inner sight, and the reason for this is quite simple. Because of the bursting venoms aspect, we always want to have as much energy as possible when we actually get a proc in that pool that we are sitting in. Unfortunately, with the preparations, this was not very functional at higher tiers, but it is still my preferred specialization when speedrunning at lower ones. And another thing to mention about dungeon difficulty is that when you are pushing at higher tiers, it is all about getting the right conditions. So that means the right modifiers, as well as the right dungeon type or mob type that you're going to be facing, which is not easy. So in this particular example, we are doing a Nightmare tier 88 of the Crusaders Cathedral with some knights, which I find are fairly easy to handle, or at least they're easy to figure out their attacks and work around them. But I have tried some other ones, higher tiered ones, and this was not necessarily a cookie cutter build that does absolutely everything. Now, all that said, let's go over the skills. There's not a whole lot to talk about here because we are using pretty much the same setup as before, but we have made a few modifications. So let's go over the important ones. We are still using Puncture. We are still using Twisting Blades along with the improved Twisting Blades for our source of days. We have the same Sturdy and Siphoning Strikes, still running Shadow Step, no dash. One thing to mention about Shadow Step, because we are using the Penitent Boot, we now lost a charge of our Shadow Step. So that is why I decided to go with 3 points into the Rapid Gambits along with the days from our Twisting Blades. This gives us a pretty fast reset on our evadability, which is very crucial for repositioning or evading damage in general. Then we have obviously Weapon Mastery, Poison Trap, same passive as before, 3 points in Exploit and Malice. Obviously, we are still using Poison Imbuement with these passives. We have put more points into Debilitating Toxin, which obviously adds more survivability. And then we've added 3 points into Frigid Finesse, which is where the whole freeze or chilling comes in effect. So we are getting a damage boost from this passive right here, as well as a modifier on our gear, which I'll cover shortly. And then we have 3 points in Enervation. Death Trap is maxed out. We have Adrenaline Rush, Haste, and finally we are using still our Exposure passive. As for the gear, this is where you'll notice a lot of changes. So I'll first start by focusing on the stats, and then we'll go over the pieces one by one. So we now have a lot more armor and life. We are very close to hitting the cap for level 100 when you are level 100. And the way we do this is by getting some extra armor rolls percentages on our helm, our chest piece, our pants, and the amulet. If you were to get perfect rolls or very close to perfect rolls, you would probably be at cap. But because I am not right now, what I typically run in the higher tier dungeons is the Iron Skin Elixir, which then puts me at cap. But because the mobs are higher level than you are, you suffer a penalty in terms of damage. Therefore, stacking even more armor with the disobedience aspect on your amulet seems to be the way to go. So that is exactly what I did. But unfortunately, I have a pretty bad roll right now. As for life, kind of the same concept. We added a few more rolls of life on some of our pieces. For example, the helm, the chest piece. We currently do not have any on our pants, but we are using the rubies along with a few other Paragon nodes that add more health. And now for the aspects and a few more stats recommendations on each piece. You definitely want cooldown reduction on your helm. If I could replace lightning resistance with poison imbuement, I think I would, because the way resistances work in the game right now, it just doesn't seem like it is worth it. Damage reduction on basic skills is always a nice plus. However, I can't really speak to the synergy between damage reduction from your armor and then the extra damage reduction you get on rolls on your gear. But just to be safe, I decided to roll even more damage reduction on my other pieces. For example, the chest piece, where we have damage reduction from close enemies and damage reduction from poison enemies, which I just cannot get to roll for just regular damage reduction. So I would say to go for that one first, and then the close enemies, and then the poisoned enemies. For the aspect on this one, we are using the Umbrus, but I would suggest you guys put it on your pants simply because your chest piece has a few more options for aspects. So I like to keep that one open for either defensive or perhaps utility. So for now, though, I would like to have this one, which I do not have another copy of. So this one is called the Cheats aspect, which gives you more damage reduction from crowd controlled enemies. So I would put this one onto my chest piece, and then I would put the one for my chest piece on my pants. Currently my pants are using the enshrouding one for even more damage reduction from our dark shrouds, which also helps, but again, maybe not perfect. As for the stats on your pants, this is one of the sources of dodge. Doesn't necessarily need to have dodge right now because we're just focusing on being as tanky as possible. And since we don't have dodge on our boots, it just doesn't feel as good to stack dodge, but the same concept here applies. You would want damage reduction and damage reduction from close enemies, and then the dodge could be replaced with a secondary stat or something else, or even another damage reduction. Back to the gloves. This is where the entire build revolves around. So this is why I called it the Noxious Ice. It is because as we are hitting enemies with the poison imbuement, when they are chilled, they're going to be further chilled by 20%, and you will deal 25% extra damage to them when they are frozen. Okay, so these gloves, along with the boots and another node or glyph in our Paragon board, is where we're going to get the full synergy of this build. Now for the twisting blades aspect, it is still on our crossbow. I would like to re-roll the dex stat off this weapon to be an all stats to get a decent boost to all of our strength, intelligence, and willpower, but I just cannot get that to roll either, and at this point it is too expensive to keep trying, so I'll try and get a new one anyway to roll the right stats on it. As for the amulet, definitely movement speed I think is always crucial. We have armor, then we have damage reduction from close enemies and damage reduction from poisoned enemies. I would like to replace the one with poison to, again, just regular damage reduction. As for the rings, lucky hit, crit chance, I always like to have those on my rings if I can, and then vulnerable and crit damage, for example, like this one here as well, which is similar but not perfect. As for the aspects, definitely want the accelerating one for more attack speed. I believe that attack speed in general is very good offensive wise, but also defensive wise to reset our skills, and then to also to trigger, for example, some of the dark shrouds off of this aspect right here. And then for the other one, finally, the bursting venom. This is where we get unlimited poison imbuement, really effective for dealing more damage quickly. This is basically your boss killer as well, along with the inner sight. And then for our weapons, we are still using 2 daggers, again, for more attack speed. We have the blast trappers on 1. Same concept here. We would want crit strike damage, vulnerable damage, close damage would be great as well. Poison works, dex, or all stats might be even better here, actually. And we do still have the Shara's Conjar for even more attack speed. Quick note about the specialization and why I decided to go back to inner sight. Although I still think that preparation, like I said before, is a little bit better, I just did not have any room to place my bursting venoms, so I decided to put it on the ring that instead had the one where you get energy when you crowd control. So this was very effective for generating a lot of energy with the preparations specialization. But because we dropped it, now using inner sight just seems more convenient. it. It also makes it less tedious to swap to inner sight and swap a ring when you are facing bosses, or for example the butcher. So I always like to have the butcher as a DPS check to see if my build is working at higher tiers. I have yet to face him at this like at a higher tier of 88 or more, but I would assume that the build is still going to work just fine. As for the Paragon board, again, a work in progress. I play with this all the time, but I think one thing that remains very similar is the first 3 boards. I still use Exploit, Deadly, and this one is called the Cunning Stratagem. Now, for the last board, or the last 2 boards, I am using Tricks of the Trade for this one because we had a little bit more survivability in from close enemies. And then the last one, I have the No Witness, but I believe that I will get more damage out of the cheap shot, so I'm probably going to change at least this last one. I will have to drop one of the legendary passives down here to make that work. So again, I'll have a link in the description for you guys so you can go check it out. As for the glyphs, we are still using Closer. Then for the other one, Exploit here, a very good as always. I am playing around with the Efficacy, I believe it is pronounced, instead of the Diminish. So we usually have Diminish in here, but what's nice about this board is that it's pretty much the same amount of points whether you go Intelligence or Strength, and because you don't need to stack that secondary stat to get the benefit of this glyph, therefore it is easy to just play around with both. So a little bit more survivability if you do the Diminish, and then a little bit more damage if you do this one instead. As for here, we still have Turf. Then in this one, we have the final piece of the puzzle for the freeze aspect of our build, which is the Frost Feeder. So we get even more chill effect by using this one, and then we deal more damage to chilled enemies. And I believe that it is needed for freezing the targets even faster, but I suppose more testing could be done to see if it is really useful or not. It is a Dex glyph, however, so you will have to reorganize this board for that to work. You'll also notice that we picked up a lot of damage reduction from vulnerable enemies, close enemies, crowd-controlled enemies, which is the part that I'm missing from the cheap shot board, which is why I'm saying I'm probably going to switch. And finally, our last glyph is Combat. This one continues to be a very crucial part of our build. So there it is, guys, the new Noxious Ice build that I've been using to push higher tier Nightmare dungeons. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do not forget to sub. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later.